Welcome to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast, and today we'll be talking all about how to build emotional and physical resiliency with your children and in your family.
Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
It is right in the title, and so we were looking up some different concepts and definitions of resiliency, so we understand how it's different than confidence, how it's different than independence, because all these terms really overlap. Mel, what's the definition that you looked up from resiliency? And what she came up with is that it's an object's ability to return to its original form. Is that correct, or do you have something different?
No, it's just the capability of returning back to your original shape or position after being compressed or put through something difficult.
So you can picture a sponge and you squish it down and you let go, and some pop back quicker and some go out, like the memory foam stuff goes out real slow as it fills back with air. That's a way to think about resiliency. When something gets compressed or squished, when can it go back to feeling normal? And in the case of kids and family, we want it to actually be improved. So what did you learn from that squishing, that compressing? And how can it help your family? So we're going to get into those topics today. We're going to save our special segments for the end of today's episode, so you want to make sure that you stay around as we talk about some of the biggest Q&A that we hear from families. And to kick off today's episode, we're going to warm it up with simply what are the biggest parenting wins we had from the week, because we've been sharing some in the Facebook group that we have, Strong Family Life. And it's helped other people come up and identify some wins of their own. So Mel, what's the best from the week?
I was going to actually choose something that happened just this morning, because I think sometimes the magic is in the little things. Not like we've had a lot of great big things. Kids are involved in all kinds of cool stuff, all kinds of opportunities, and I love that. But this morning in the kitchen, as we were getting ready, Everett accidentally broke a glass. And ironically, we've broken this glass like 3 times. Like we keep rebuying the same glass. And right when it dropped, I was like, oh no. He ran upstairs, started crying. So I realized we don't want to overreact. I cleaned it up. I went upstairs and I was simply said to him, Everett, do you think that I've ever broken something? And he's no. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've definitely broken things. And you could see the look in his face. He was expecting me to be angry with him. He was kind of waiting for that, oh, this is so terrible what you did. But instead, I just brought it back to reality. This happens to everyone. It's really not a big deal. It's just a glass. And he was able to bounce back just like that. That was it. He was back to smiling, back to normal. So I think it just, parenting-wise, the fact that I was able to think about what I wanted to say and follow through with it and not get stuck in the emotion of how it does suck to clean up broken glass.
My parenting win from the week has been our ability to say yes and then figure it out. Things haven't been ideal with scheduling because kids' schedules are busy. Henry has soccer and a couple nights a week. Logan has concrete couch stuff at the library, and kids were asking them to go play, and it would have been easy just to say, no, let's just stay home for night. But our ability to say yes and figure it out. Henry went last night with a friend down to the expo for the Pikes Peak races. He got to see dirt bikes driving around, got to meet drivers for the cars that are doing I believe it's the Pikes Peak climb this weekend, and not just an oval race where they race the cars as fast as they can up Pikes Peak and they shut down the mountain. Pretty wild race to see. And he got to go down to the expo with a friend. It was out later than normal, but we just said yes, and we'll figure it out because it is an opportunity for them to learn and grow in something that they like, so we want to support it. And jumping and building the parachute on the way down approach sometimes to parenting, but I think we've been making the most of it.
I would agree. I think almost every evening my heart feels so full because we're really packing the days in with things that matter, and a lot of that is from goals the kids set at the beginning of the summer and just connections we've made, and like you said, saying yes, even though saying no might be easier.
Let's start back at the beginning with resiliency. We already hit the definition, so I guess it's the very beginning. The next question is, why is this important, Mel?
We want our kids to be able to bounce back quickly and not get stuck in emotional turmoil over some kind of adversity they went through, how small or how big. So I think that it's important because we want them to know that they have the ability, to be able to choose to bounce back. And that's a skill. So I think the other piece of this is I was a therapist for 5 years. Resiliency was a big thing we talked about. And sometimes it sounded like some kids have it, some kids don't. But My perspective definitely is different now. I think it's a skill that needs to be gained and practiced, and I think that's why it's important. It's not, I wasn't born that way, so I guess I just can't. I find it's very important to see it as a skill and then take action to grow and build that skill.
I think it's definitely a skill, and whoever told you it wasn't is silly.
I don't know if anybody told me. I think that was my assumption at that naive stage in my life, maybe.
I find resiliency really important. So consider this. Perhaps we know an adult in our life that has had something happen to him or her, and they still carry it with them every day in a negative way, that it affects their ability to move forward. Of course, you're going to carry things with you because they're your life's events, but you can also focus on what you learn from them and how you can use that to move forward. The last 2 weeks ago, I was doing a ruck for a military charity called 50 for the Fallen, 50 miles, where it's celebrating the legacy of people that they've lost. Most people through the military, not me, just through family life. I reflect a lot on how my father passed when I was a lot younger. And people can be very negative about those things. They can carry a lot of weight and baggage and can affect their own life. But they had this event to try to help people think about the positive things and be more resilient, to reform back to their regular life from the impact that those tragedies had on them. And so I've been thinking more and more about this concept, because we do see people that carry so much extra baggage and weight with them. And if we teach them the skills of resiliency when they're young, it's going to pay huge dividends as they get older. Because I see so many, unfortunately, broken people from the events in their life that they just haven't been able to piece back together and reform.
I think that it was important how you said that we want to teach this skill young. So a piece of that's going to be the adult having to realize it and role model it. But I ended up asking Logan today what he thinks resiliency means. So we talk about this term. It's in the beginning of the podcast every week. And I love what he said: to keep trying and not be defeated. So whatever's happened in your life, whatever event is impacting you on a daily basis, are you letting it defeat you? Or are you finding ways to move past it? And I don't mean forget it, because I know for a lot of people there is trauma and there is difficulty. However, I think it's important to realize, is that situation defeating you on a daily basis, or are you finding ways to overcome it? And I love that the 50 for the Fallen found an opportunity I was there at the beginning. They weren't like, we're just walking 50 miles. You can reflect on whatever you want. Specifically, the person in charge said, I want you to think about your why. Why are you here? What are you doing? And I love that he gave you something to think about. It wasn't just like walking. Like, you had some mental exercise to do at the same time. And I think that impacts resiliency.
So I want to start top down. Let's start with parents, because I feel like a big piece of all of this, family life, parenting, confidence, independence, high performance kids, all starts with proper role modeling from the adults. It's one of the easiest ways to teach. And so I like to start considering what can we do impact in our own lives before we start talking tactics and strategy that we can teach or implement with children. So it takes a little self-reflection that Mel's talking about. What are we carrying with us right now that is causing us not to bounce back to at least our full form, or even better? What's the extra baggage or weight that is squishing us down a little bit? You can picture just weight on your shoulders or back. And that's why I say you're carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders, because you physically look smaller. Your head starts to go down and you're not bouncing back to your full self. What are those things that are causing that in our lives as adults? And then how can we start fixing and healing that, whether it's a physical thing? Those are easier to talk about. Is it with the case of my father, it was a lot of unhealthy habits that caused him to lose his physical shape. He got very out of shape. He smoked. He was 350 plus pounds. You don't even know. He used to just measure himself in weight based on how many fingers he was away from the steering wheel. And his chair was all the way back to tell if he gained weight, because he wouldn't get on a scale. And so he had an inability to bounce back from that. If we had some reflective time, hey, there's some habits in my life that are causing me to not be my full self, to be the full proud self that I am. What can I do now to bounce back? And then how can I include my family in my journey a little bit so that they can see and help and contribute to me being resilient, so that they learn the lessons along the way.
But self-reflection, like you said, is so key. You have to be able to sit down and be honest with yourself. What's holding me back? For me, a lot of times it's the stressors of worrying about the details of life. I get this work email or this other thing happens, and then I start to just worry. So one of my goals to become more resilient and in the face of showing the kids too is to not let that bog me down. Just take it as it comes. What can I do to act? And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is to move to action more quickly and not get stuck in the stress or the emotion. And if there's something I cannot do, then I need to work on letting it go. So I think a lot of times, like I said, it's self-reflecting. You have to be honest with yourself. What is it happening in my life that's holding me back? And what action steps can I take? So literally, if I get an email that's work-related and I can't do anything about it on Friday, wait till Monday, I'm going to put it on a Post-it note and not think about it. So it's just taking that action to be able to bounce back and not just let it bog you down all the time.
That's a good tactic, and I don't want to just gloss over. You can write things down, table it to the weekend. We like to have pads of paper. Mel's got one now. I don't. Mel is always good with that stuff, always good with the Post-its. I am very good with my inbox management of just muting conversations until the time I need to deal with it, or scheduling emails, because I know the person's going to reply right away. So I'm just going to schedule it on Friday. I'll schedule it for Tuesday morning, and then it's off my mind and done with it, so I can focus on other parts of my life that I can bounce back.
Exactly.
With.
Logan was making fun of me because you have too many lists. And I'm like, that's how I function. If it's written down on a piece of paper, it gets it out of my brain onto paper, and then I can be more resilient. I can bounce back and more fully pour myself into what they need or to what we're doing as a family this weekend. Being that our jobs are all from home, it's very easy for weekends to just blend into weeks. And one of our goals lately has been to separate that out, to really say, this is the weekend, even though it's summertime. We try to really see it as the time to let those other things sit aside. And my own personal tactic is to write it all down, because then I can sleep more easily and I could just feel like I can then bounce back, not get stuck, and give myself more fully to the family.
So I want to go back to a point you were making at the beginning, where something that really helps you is coming up with a plan. I think that is a critical step to building resiliency, is to take a breath, lower the emotion so we can think more clearly and think, what's the next thing I can do? And so we haven't talked about this a lot on the podcast for specific reasons that I don't want this podcast about it. But we did the 50. I did the 50 for the fallen. Then I did a Spartan race. I don't know what it was, the Beast. I think it was my first obstacle course race, and the goal was to try to get through everything with a couple people, that the organizer and some other people from the 50 wanted to try to also do this 21K Spartan race, the 10K and the 5K in the same weekend. Well, 10 miles into the 50, my feet are all blistered. I actually put on socks for this podcast in case I do. Sometimes I do this leg cross thing. Like my toes are purple.
They're
my
gross.
God. Hey, I didn't say gross.
All right. They're unsightly?
No. They're used.
Okay.
They're worn. They're accomplished. All those would be
It's
better.
all perspective.
I'll give you a minute to think about another one. The feet are beat. And so 10 miles in, it was the footwear. Now I bought a lot of different shoes. I had these shoes that just did not work for me. First time in my challenge of life this has ever happened. And I got blisters on the sides of my feet, the toes, between my toes, heels, like 10 miles into this thing. And then we did the 50, and then we did the first Spartan race. And I got home and I was just beat, because the next two races are the next day. So it was 50 miles through the night, right into the 21K. All the hard stuff was done. But I didn't want to get up the next morning. I didn't want to go do the 10K, 5K anymore, because I felt so beat up. And so the saying is something that I use with the kids, is the whole point of the story. I'm not saying that, people don't understand how far away from being an obstacle course racer I was when I was younger, over 300 pounds, could barely jog down the street. And so we don't talk about this a lot of stuff because it lacks perspective. However, what I tell my kids is, all right, let's just see how you feel in the morning. And you're always one good night's sleep away from feeling better, whether they're feeling sick, whether they're feeling an emotional stress. Hey, let's come up with a plan. Let's get one good night's sleep is typically my plan, and then we'll reevaluate in the morning. And so it puts down the pressure of deciding, this thing's going to be terrible right now. So in this specific case, went to bed, got up in the morning. I thought, you know what? My next step is I can go and help at the expo a little bit. And I told Mel I'm just going to go over to the race, work the table. And as soon as I got there, I was one step closer to being able to do it. I didn't fully commit yet because I was still pretty crushed. And my feet were What was the...
Unhappy?
Okay. All right. You thought of an acceptable one. My feet were unhappy with their situation in life. And
It's like Med Libs.
Yeah. And so I just moved one step closer, didn't fully commit. I got there. I'm like, all right, I can do this. And I did the 10K and then the 5K, and we got through it all, through some more adversity in there, but we got through it all. And the planning was like, all right, I'm just going to nudge this a little bit forward. We're going to get one good night's sleep. And then, all right, I'm just going to go and see what happens. And breaking it down into digestible stages. If a kid feels sick, emotional, like, all right, let's get a good night's sleep. Let's talk about it in the morning is a great plan to use to teach them some resiliency that they know that they can bounce back. A lot of kids don't know it's an option. They think this thing happened, and parents too. This thing happened, and that's just going to be my burden to carry for the rest of life. Like, all right, no, let's reform, let's bounce back, let's check the morning. Sometimes with more acute trauma, it's going to take longer, whether it's physical or emotional. However, just have a time for like, all right, my body's super resilient. Our selves are super resilient. We can bounce back from this. Let's come up with a game plan and work forward.
I love what you said about how kids might not even know, and adults too, that this is an option. So do you think that society or culture tends to make it seem worse than it actually is?
There's certainly this victim mentality that some people fall into because they get so much attention from that situation that they confuse that intention with them feeling better. So they got the attention that they, and as a side effect of whatever happened. And it's a lot of well-meaning people checking on them. So it's not a negative thing. It's the people just doing what people do, and they get stuck in this victim mentality, get attention, victim mentality, but that attention isn't what they need. They need some sort of healing over whatever length of time it is so that they can work themselves out of it. And I think a powerful thing to do as we move from adults to kids, blending this topic together, is that purposefully reading stories, and if you watch movies, watching movies of stories of resiliency so that they learn that it's an option to bounce back. These people who have had similar things happen in their life and overcome it, or had tremendously more difficult things. To do these 50-mile challenges, 100-mile challenges, like I read on people that have accomplished things. I read on some of the atrocities that were happening in Africa a few years ago, where there was just these refugees that had to walk as children hundreds of miles to get to safety, and they were doing this because they had to at that age, and they were resilient enough. And it was just like, I'm comfortable in my clothes. I got water, I got food stations. Like, this is nothing compared to what other people have gone through, and in this case these children had gone through and overcome. And learning those stories that it is possible and practical and people have done it is a good perspective on resiliency, and being around people who are resilient too. I don't want to get too far off. We have that podcast episode on you are the people you hang out with. If you hang out with people who just want to talk about their problems and never try to bounce back from them, and they get so much feel goods about the discussion, then you will also be like that. If you're around resilient people who acknowledge it and acknowledge that they need some work to bounce back, then you too will learn those steps as well.
I think one of the essential ideas that you're saying is exposing yourself to examples of resiliency, because it's very easy to hear about something that someone did that was resilient. Like, for example, your challenge you did. That does sound so like otherworldly. Like, I could never do that. That sounds so hard. And I think we want to bridge the gap between, of course it was hard, but anybody could do it if they put their mind to it. We want our kids to see that these things are possible. I don't want them to watch a movie about someone who did something amazing and just think, how nice for them. I could never do that. I'm not capable of that. And I like the example of the kids who had to walk in Africa, because it shows you the human body is capable. You can stretch yourself. You don't need, society will often say, you won't be able to do that. You're not strong enough. That's too hard. Like, I think we talked about our Father's Day marathon, where we as a family walked a marathon length of miles at the different parks around the springs. And honestly, even for myself at the end of it, I thought to myself, wow, like, that wasn't so bad. I could have kept walking. And the kids learn now that 26 miles is very doable. They're capable. If they, for some reason, had to walk somewhere far, they now know through experience that they could do it. So I think setting them up with success in terms of giving them opportunities to watch resiliency, to know people who are resilient, but then to actually set up and do some things that show them that they are resilient is going to bridge that gap. So they don't become those people who just sit back and say, it must be nice, or I could never. We really want to avoid that mentality.
And in your example, I don't think we haven't discussed it on this episode, but for Father's Day, I wanted to give the family the gift of perspective, because I think that is powerful when you want to build resiliency and independence and confidence all at the same time. But the perspective was that you could do a marathon, and they said, okay, let's go out. And so for Father's Day, we walked a marathon. Didn't run it. We had food, water, we had van stops just to double check, make sure that everything was safe. And we went out and did a marathon around various parks. The very next day, what did the kids bounce back and do? We had a friend reach out and say, hey, Logan, do you want to go kayaking and paddleboarding at a lake? He said, yeah, absolutely. He bounced back the very next day. I know people who like hobble around and walk weird, and I did a marathon 3 months ago. I'm just going to start working out now. I've heard those things. And so then the very next day he's out paddleboarding, and Henry's at soccer practice. Like, their ability to bounce back is amazing, and it is a little bit natural as long as we nurture it as well.
So much of it is just preconceived notions. If you do a marathon, you will need a month to recover. Says who? But I think that when you have that in your head, you almost make it happen. So we want to try to teach the kids that you can I want you to have your own experience and then grow from that. Don't just take what someone else said or what supposedly is the way it is. Actually have the experience yourself and make a decision about it. I think that's really powerful that they bounced back. And they might have even thought, like, the next morning, my feet didn't hurt, but I expected them to. Like, I thought I was going to wake up and be hobbling, because that's what has been passed down through just people talking about marathons or whatever. And of course, some people's feet are going to hurt. I'm not saying that, but I certainly in my mind thought it was going to be a much bigger recovery than it actually was. And so much of the day was just attitude. Everett, the 5-year-old that I spent all day with, he was just happy and jolly all day, and we're just enjoying nature and enjoying walking and being together. So much of it is just what happens between your two ears. That's really what it comes down to, is your mindset about things. And one of my big points about resiliency today is how quickly do you move from feeling to action? How long are you going to let yourself stay down before you bounce back? My little example of the broken glass this morning, I could have been like, today's going to suck. Like, I started out with this broken glass. Now there's going to be a cleanup to do, and Everett's upset. And it really could have just spiraled into a terrible day. But instead, I was able to just take that moment. This is happening right now. Let's do the best we can with this moment. And then because I chose to make it silly and move past it, now the rest of the day is open. But it's so much of what preconceived notions you have about your thoughts, about what the situation that you're in is, to be able to bounce back.
So I'm going to throw out one more, and then I'm going to release Mel and the rest of her list. So the question, based on what Mel is saying and I've talked about, is, okay, maybe you do this self-reflection, you realize that you aren't resilient yet. And so you figured out, all right, I need to work on myself too. I carry a lot of weight with me emotionally. If something breaks, it does throw my day off. Something that someone says at work throws my day off. So what do I do about it? We talked about role modeling, you being the role model for your kids before. You can also find some role modeling for you to follow from resilient people. Now, there's two different ways to do this. I've learned this from the fitness field, and it is very important because Mel hit it on earlier. Sometimes people hold up people who accomplish amazing things as that is too unrealistic for me to ever accomplish, and it's almost demotivating. So if you are in that group of people, you want to find smaller stories of resiliency. You're not looking for the kids who had to walk the hundreds of miles stories. You're looking for the person around the block that got out and walked and cleared their head once a week. So you need to identify what type of person you are and what type of motivation you seek. There are people who do reading those big stories, like reading the David Goggins stories or these big stories of accomplishment, and that motivates them to become more resilient. For other people, they read those stories and say, must be nice. That's not anything like me. I'm not like that situation. I could never do that. If you are that type of person, that's fine too. You just need to find and identify with slightly smaller stories. We tell more stories at our fitness companies about people who started who were like them and got a little bit further than the people who are out there winning world champions. Yes, we celebrate those people, but they're good. They've got it right now. And so we want to tell more stories that are a little bit smaller so that more people can find themselves in it.
And I like to always bring it back to the kids. So the majority of the remaining of my list is examples of how we've made resiliency happen with our family. And it's really about practicing the mindset and the language you choose to apply to a situation. So a couple examples here. Our son Everett, oftentimes when he falls, which happens quite often, and we have rocky ground here, it's not soft grass like it used to be where we used to live, he will fall down and he'll say, "That felt good."
Yeah, like grunt, oh, that felt good, and gets back up because he doesn't want to be out of the play.
Exactly. He's motivated to get back into it. But when I first saw that, my mind was like, how could that possibly feel good? But he has such a strong mindset to tell himself, this feels good. And just saying that to yourself helps you bounce back. And I'm not saying that every situation is going to feel good, but if you can find some silver lining, if you can find some way to arrange it in your mind that it's not super terrible, because he could have easily started crying, went inside, felt bad for himself, and then he really would have ruined his time. So I just love that example as if something difficult happens throughout your day, can you somehow say to yourself, how can I make this feel good?
Yeah, and something that is a very good example of kids. He falls down, he bounces back up. It's amazing. I don't even know where. I guess he just learned it through the role modeling I'm talking about. But we didn't teach him that. But he doesn't want to be out. He just wants to get right back into it. The question that you can ask yourself as an adult, whether it's an emotional or physical situation, is what is this situation trying to teach me? And so it's not necessarily like, how can I make this feel good? Because I don't want people spiraling out to that self-care reign I went on where they're like, all right, you know how I make this feel good? I get ice cream. Like that immediacy. So when you're in a difficult situation, you're looking to bounce back, you start making progress by considering, what is this trying to teach me?
Yeah, that's really a great way to put it. Thank you. Another example, recently, so Henry was playing soccer the last 2 seasons with a club. He wasn't playing for school yet. And he was playing with a range of ages, but he was at the top end of the age range. He was one of the top players on the team. So he had a lot of confidence because he was one of the best players. Now he's going to be starting to play for the middle school team. And thankfully, the coach has these pickup games twice a week all summer, which is really exciting. So he can practice with other kids. And he showed up the first and second day, and realized, wow, I'm playing with kids that are older and faster and more skilled. And that was really hard for him to come home and realize, I'm not the best on the team anymore. So that kind of put him down. That was like that sponge getting compressed. He was really uncomfortable with that. It was really hitting his confidence at a low point. And I explained to him, I said, it's going to take you shifting your perspective. It is hard to go from being the best to not being the best on your team, to realizing there's a lot for you to learn. And initially, he does need some time to just process it and almost complain a little bit, but just I think processing it is a better way to put it. But then he said, I do know that I can learn from these kids. Being around people who are better than you at something, you will inevitably get better at it as long as you're willing to learn from them. So I think I already see that resilience being built in him. And I know it is because he's going back every time. He could easily say, I'm not going to go this time because I don't like that feeling of not being as good as I used to be or as the other kids are. So we just talk him through it. So much of it is, how do you talk to your kids about it? Because if I had approached it differently, and just said, that's okay, no big deal, you can just feel bad about it. And I don't know, he could have completely walked away with a different perspective. But I tried to shape it in the way that he saw it as a growth perspective. Joe said a second ago, what can I learn from this? I don't want him to stay down too long. It's very easy to just say, I suck now, I'm not good anymore. And that's the road he could have certainly gone down. But he was able to pull himself out, get back in there 2 days later for the next pickup game, and he's all in. So that's been a big resiliency exercise for him. So that's another example with him. And then with Logan, it's important for him. He used to really fly off the handle pretty quickly when things didn't go his way. And I have a quote from the Stoics that I think really goes well with this. So it says, welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace. I think that's really important because we oftentimes will think to ourselves, things never go my way. That soccer game didn't go my way. That test didn't go my way. I think it's important to see that we cannot control a lot of the events that happen in our lives. We cannot control things that might have happened in our childhood or in ways that we were victims. However, if we can find a way out of it, if we can ask ourselves, what can we learn from it? If we learn to take events as they come and not see them as something that's going to knock us over for days, I think that really helps pull us out more quickly. So an example for Logan, he goes in 3D prints, and I think 80% of the time the prints fail. I don't know what it is, something with a printer. Maybe he doesn't have the skill set down yet. And initially he would get very angry about it. And over time, he kept going back because he loves the idea of 3D printing. He loves the idea of creating something. And now when it doesn't work, he shrugs his shoulders, and he's been able to teach himself to bounce back so much quicker. So each person has their own way of learning this resiliency. Each person has different interests and talents, and I think if you foster it with each kid individually through this mindset, so for Logan, 3D printing, for Henry, soccer, whatever their circumstance might be, you can learn this skill. And I've seen it in each of our kids based on their own genuine interests. So I think if you can identify what is it in your kid, or if the situation that comes up, maybe there was a soccer game or a football game that didn't go well. Joe has this great way of talking with Henry after the game. He asks him a couple questions to help him reflect and bounce back.
All right, let's wrap this conversation on resiliency up in a moment. I'm going to ask you for an example from your life on how you're resilient. And so the reason why we find all this important, we talked about role modeling, you for the kids, you finding your own, sometimes even the kids for you, however it bounces back from things, teaches me some phrases which we like to use, and it's great to learn from them. Nudging it forward, figuring out what can I learn from this situation. If it's something weighing on your mind, you write it down, get it off your mind. It does not need to soak into your family time and family life unless it's family related. And so there's a lot of different tactics in this episode for you to use, and some examples from our various age groups on how it plays out, including in our own life. So let's finish, Mel, with an example from our own life. What's an example where you were resilient? A broken glass example doesn't matter.
No, I'm going to go with a big one. When we decided to move, when that idea first came up in our conversation on a walk we took, I totally fell apart. I feel like it was almost a panic attack. I just thought, this is not possible. I don't know anything about leaving this place where we've grown up. But then I suddenly saw the opportunities that could arise from this move, and it got exciting. But honestly, initially, it was a big low for me. I was really scared, really nervous, and going through the process of deciding to move, of selling our home while homeschooling and all that, I feel like that built my resilience as a person so much more. I don't want to move again, but I am not worried that if that had to happen, I'd be fine because I've been through it this time and I've learned so much from it. So I'm a much more resilient person today because of the move that we chose to do. What about you?
Resiliency is not optional in your life. The world's circumstances will force you to be resilient at some point. So it is very wise to work on these skills that we're talking about. 2020 is a great example where we had all of our rentals, the rent moratorium in the state, everyone stopped paying rent. We had big mortgages, owned a fitness company that was closed for 7 to 9 months in the state, and employees to take care of. Kids at school that were no longer at school in a school district that wasn't proactive in getting them educational experiences, and then the property, home, are we going to move thing all at once. I didn't want to deal with any of those just happened. And so you have to be resilient, and everyone has a story from those years where they had to learn it and practice it. So celebrate those things you have in your life that you have been able to overcome, even though they haven't been ideal. I will go very small picture since you went big picture. Go back to the Spartan race, the 10K, where I showed up on Sunday morning to do the 10K, and they have this little barbed wire thing you crawl underneath, and these little hurdles that have been easy. I've already been through it twice. Jumped over the first one, landed like a little bit of a hole. My left ankle rolls, and I feel a little popping in the top of it. Now, I've always heard people in sports say, like I felt a pop, and they're down, they're screaming on the ground. This really stinks. Like, I showed up, I'm going through this, like I want to complete this, and I felt this ankle roll. And from exercise, I know it might not be a joint. It could be things sliding. It could be muscle surfaces sliding on top of each other. Popping doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be a critical injury. And I just had to stand there for a minute, put a little weight on it, like not feeling great. And I had to go through a little self-evaluation of what am I going to do in this situation. There's people at each obstacle. I could raise my hand. A lot of people would raise their hand and tap out and say, I'm just going to stand here for 60 seconds. I'm already a slug, not a great runner. It's not like I'm going to compete and win this thing anyways. My goal is to complete the challenge in my case. And so I just waited like a minute or two, and our bodies are amazing. It gave me the signal like, hey, you got to be aware of this thing. It wasn't telling me that I can't walk on this thing, because that was my evaluation of it. Took a couple little steps, and it was a little tender, but it wasn't something that was critical. And so our body sends us signals, and I want to work on my own ability to interpret them. And so this signal wasn't, all right, I'm going to lay on the ground crying, which, shoot, I might have done that years ago, where people fall over from things. And it was telling me, all right, you probably shouldn't do that again. That's not a great idea. Then it could lead to an injury, and you have to be careful of this tender area. And so then I started walking a little bit, started to feel a little bit better. I was acknowledging to my body that I heard the signal, and it was acknowledging, all right, I hope you got it. Like, now the pain eased up, and walked on for a while, and then it went away, finished the 10K, finished the 5K. Did get puffy and swollen. We took care of it, and that's just acknowledging things and not putting so much emotional baggage on top of the thing that happens.
This reminds me, so yesterday Logan jammed his finger, and he keeps like showing it to me, and he keeps talking about it. And I'm like, Logan, I get that you jammed your finger. You need to think about something else, focus about something else. And then it's not going to be as big of a deal. It'll help you to bounce back. So I think sometimes people like to just press into the pain, press into whatever that unwanted circumstance is. And by pressing into it, you might get attention, but then it doesn't lead you to action. So I had to tell him, I'm like, I understand you're showing me this. I understand you want attention. I want to give you attention for something positive now. Like, we're done with the complaining and the showing off of the finger that you jammed. So sometimes I think it's just flipping that switch. Like you said, you need to stop and think and make a conscious decision and not just focus on pressing into the pain.
We have a big push for written reviews. If you found this helpful and you take away something that you can use in your families, go on to Apple, or if you Spotify, drop a 5-star and a written review. We're trying to grow this podcast, and we're doing it all organically and bootstrapping it for you and families. So please help us out by sharing it and dropping a couple kind words for us to hear, so that we can keep pushing on and continue the Strong Family Project. Visit us at strongfamilyproject.com, where we'll give you all the elements of our path and our notes on them, again, completely free. We'll talk to you on the next episode.